Mrs. Patricia Coleman had been teaching second grade for 19 years. 19 years of crayon drawing, scraped knees, loose teeth, and that particular chaos that only 7-year-olds can create. She'd seen hundreds of kids come through her classroom door at Oakwood Elementary, and she liked to think she'd gotten pretty good at reading them. The loud ones who needed attention, the shy ones who needed encouragement, the troublemakers who just needed someone to believe in them. But there was something about the boy in the third row that she couldn't quite figure out. His name was Danny Webb, and he wasn't loud or disruptive. He didn't cause problems or talk back. In fact, he barely spoke at all unless she called on him directly. He always arrived at school at least 20 minutes early, standing by the classroom door with his backpack clutched tight against his chest, waiting for her to unlock it. And every afternoon, when the final bell rang and the other kids would sprint toward the buses like they'd been shot from cannons, Danny would take his time. He'd organize his desk slowly, pack his bag carefully, and be the very last one to leave. Patricia noticed other things too. Small things that added up to a picture she didn't quite want to see. His clothes were always clean, but they were the same 3 or 4 shirts rotated throughout the week. His jeans had patches on the knees, the kind someone had sewn on with care but couldn't quite hide the wear underneath. His sneakers had seen better days. Way better days. The sole on the left one was coming loose, and she'd watched him try to glue it back together with school glue during art class. It didn't work, so he'd wrapped duct tape around it instead, gray duct tape that got dirtier and more frayed with each passing week. Then there was lunch, or rather the lack of it. Most kids in her class either brought lunch boxes packed by their parents or had money for the cafeteria. Danny had neither. For the first few weeks of school, Patricia watched him sit at the lunch table with nothing in front of him. He'd tell the other kids he wasn't hungry, or that he'd eaten a big breakfast, or that he had a stomachache. Different excuses, but always excuses. After the third week, Patricia started buying an extra sandwich from the cafeteria and leaving it on his desk with a note that said she'd accidentally ordered 2 lunches. Danny would eat it without a word, and they both pretended it was just a happy accident. But the thing that really caught Patricia's attention, the thing she couldn't stop thinking about, was the shoebox. It was an old Nike box, the kind that had once held a pair of sneakers but now held something else entirely. Something important. Danny kept it in his desk, pushed toward the back but never completely out of sight. He was protective of it in a way that seemed unusual for a 7-year-old boy. Kids his age usually showed off their treasures. They brought toys for show and tell, traded Pokemon cards at recess, and left their belongings scattered everywhere without a second thought. Not Danny. He guarded that shoebox like it contained gold. Patricia would watch him from her desk during independent reading time. The other kids would be sprawled on beanbags with their books, and Danny would be at his desk, quietly lifting the lid of that box just an inch or two. He'd peek inside for a few seconds, his small face softening in a way it never did any other time. Then he'd close it gently and go back to his reading. Something settled in his expression that hadn't been there before. She wondered what was in there. A toy, maybe? A collection of some kind? Kids that age loved collecting things. Rocks, stickers, bottle caps, anything really. But the way he looked at that box didn't seem like a kid admiring a toy. It seemed like something deeper. Something that mattered in a way Patricia couldn't quite name. During recess, while the other kids played basketball or chased each other around the playground, Danny would sit under the big oak tree by himself. He wasn't sad exactly. He didn't cry or look upset. He just sat there watching the others, sometimes drawing in a notebook he kept in his backpack. Patricia had tried encouraging him to join the games a few times, but he'd just smile politely and say he was okay. And he did seem okay in that moment at least, content in his own little world. But Patricia had been teaching long enough to know the difference between a child who chose to be alone and a child who felt alone. Danny was the second kind. She'd looked at his school records, hoping to understand more. The file was thin, which told its own story. Sporadic attendance last year in first grade, multiple tardies, emergency contact information that listed only a mother, no father mentioned, an address in the older part of town where the houses were small and the rent was cheap, a note from last year's teacher that said Danny was quiet but capable and would benefit from more support at home. That last phrase always bothered Patricia. It was teacher code for something's not right, but we don't know what to do about it. She thought about calling home, but something made her hesitate. Sometimes getting involved made things better, and sometimes it made things worse. She'd seen both outcomes over the years, and she'd learned to move carefully, to watch and wait and figure out what a child really needed before jumping in with both feet. So she watched Danny. She watched him arrive early and leave late. She watched him guard that shoebox and sit alone at recess. She watched him accept the extra sandwiches without quite meeting her eyes, pride and hunger doing battle on his young face. And she watched the way he seemed to carry something heavy, something no second grader should have to carry. It was a Friday in early November when everything changed. The afternoon had been chaotic. There'd been a fire drill, then a birthday celebration for another student, then the usual end-of-week excitement that made the kids bounce off the walls. When the final bell rang, the classroom emptied in its typical stampede of backpacks and voices and slamming desks. Patricia started tidying up, picking up the usual debris of a Friday afternoon. Crayon pieces, scattered worksheets, someone's forgotten jacket. She was wiping down the whiteboard when she glanced toward the third row and noticed Danny's desk. The lid was still up, and there, sitting in plain view, was the shoebox. He'd forgotten it. In all the chaos and excitement, Danny had actually forgotten the one thing he never forgot. Patricia walked over slowly, looking toward the door, half expecting him to come running back any second. But the hallway was already quiet, the buses pulling away from the curb outside. She stood there for a long moment staring at that old Nike box. She knew she should just leave it, wait for Danny to come back on Monday. It wasn't her business what a 7-year-old kept in his desk, but something made her reach for it anyway. Maybe it was 19 years of teaching instinct. Maybe it was the memory of Danny's face every time he looked inside, that strange mixture of sadness and comfort. Maybe she just needed to know if she was right to be worried. Patricia lifted the lid, expecting baseball cards or toy cars or something. That would make her feel silly for being concerned. What she found instead made her heart drop straight through the floor. The shoebox wasn't filled with toys or trading cards or any of the things you'd expect from a 7-year-old boy. Instead, there were papers, lots of them. Small pieces of notebook paper folded carefully, some crisp and new, others soft and worn like they'd been handled 100 times. Patricia picked up the first one with shaking hands and unfolded it. The handwriting was uneven, the letters big and small in the way of a child still learning to write. But the words were clear enough. "Dear Mom, I hope you are feeling better today. I was good at school. Love, Danny." She set it down gently and picked up another. "Dear Dad, I miss you. I made you this drawing of a truck. I remember you liked trucks. Love, Danny." Another one. "Please don't be sad tonight. I can be quieter. I promise I'll be really good." Patricia's throat went tight. She picked up another note and another and another. There were dozens of them, maybe 30 or 40, all written in Danny's careful second-grade handwriting. Letters to his mom, letters to a dad who apparently wasn't around anymore. Letters that read like prayers from a child trying to fix things he couldn't possibly understand or control. "I saved my lunch money for you. I'm sorry I made noise this morning. Maybe tomorrow will be better. Love you even when you're sad." Each note broke her heart a little more. These weren't the writings of a kid playing make-believe. These were real, raw. They were the words of a child who was desperately, achingly lonely, writing letters to parents who probably had no idea he was writing them at all. At the bottom of the box, underneath all the folded notes, Patricia found a photograph. It was creased down the middle and faded. The colors washed out like it had been left in the sun. The photo showed a man and a woman, both young, standing in front of a small house. The woman had dark hair and was smiling, her hand raised to shield her eyes from the sun. The man had his arm around her shoulders, grinning at the camera. They looked happy. They looked like the kind of people in the before pictures before life got hard. Patricia turned the photo over. On the back, in adult handwriting, someone had written, "Summer 2018, 5 years ago." Danny would have been 2 years old. She set the photo down carefully and found one more thing at the very bottom of the box. A small plastic sandwich bag, the kind you'd pack a snack in. Inside were coins, quarters, dimes, nickels, pennies. Patricia didn't count them, but it couldn't have been more than $3 or $4. She sat down at her desk, the shoebox in front of her, and felt the weight of what she was looking at settle in her chest. This wasn't just a kid being quiet or shy. This was a child carrying the kind of burden that most adults would struggle with. Danny was living in a home where something was very wrong, and he was trying to fix it the only way he knew how. By being good, by being quiet, by saving money he shouldn't have to save and writing letters he shouldn't have to write. Patricia thought about the early mornings when Danny would stand outside her classroom door waiting to be let in. Was he avoiding going home? Or was home too chaotic, too unpredictable, and school was the only place that felt safe? She thought about the way he sat alone at recess, content in his solitude. Was he really content? Or had he just learned that it was easier to be alone than to explain why he was different? Why his shoes had duct tape and his lunch came from his teacher's pity? She thought about the way he looked into this box every day, his face softening. He wasn't looking at treasure or toys. He was looking at his own hope, written out in careful letters. Hope that his mom would feel better. Hope that things would get better. Hope that someone would notice how good he was being, and nobody had. Nobody except a teacher who'd almost missed it too. Patricia pulled out her phone and opened Danny's file in the school system. She read through it again more carefully this time. Mother's name, Jennifer Webb. No father listed, just a dash in that field. The address was on Maple Street, the older part of town where the houses were small and packed close together. The emergency contact was the same number as the mother's. No backup. No grandparents or aunts or uncles listed, just Jennifer. There was a note in the system from the school counselor last year. Student shows signs of anxiety. Home visit attempted but no answer. Multiple messages left unreturned. Another note from the nurse's office. Student appears underweight. Possible food insecurity. Food insecurity. That was the polite way of saying a kid wasn't getting enough to eat. Patricia thought about calling Child Protective Services. That was the protocol, wasn't it? When you saw signs of neglect or abuse. But she'd made that call before years ago with another student, and she'd watched that family get torn apart. The investigation had been brutal. The parents, who were struggling but trying, had been humiliated. The kid had been traumatized. And in the end, nothing had really changed except that family stopped trusting anyone. She didn't want to do that to Danny. Not yet, anyway. Not until she knew more. But she couldn't just do nothing either. She couldn't pretend she hadn't opened that box. She couldn't look at those letters, at that photograph, at those carefully saved coins, and just go home for the weekend like everything was fine. Patricia picked up one of the notes again and read it slowly. I can be quieter. I promise I'll be really good. What was happening in that house that made a 7-year-old think he needed to be quieter? To be better? Kids that age were supposed to be loud and messy and full of energy. They were supposed to slam doors and leave their stuff everywhere and drive their parents a little crazy. That was normal. That was healthy. Danny wasn't being a normal 7-year-old. He was being invisible. He was trying to take up as little space as possible. Like he thought maybe if he was small enough and quiet enough and good enough, everything would somehow be okay. Patricia knew that feeling. She'd grown up in a home like that herself, where she'd learned to read her father's moods and make herself scarce when things got tense. She remembered being 9 years old and tiptoeing through her own house, afraid that any noise might set off another argument. She remembered the relief of going to school, where things were predictable and safe, where teachers smiled at her and nobody yelled. She'd promised herself back then that if she ever had the chance to help a kid like her, she would. She'd become a teacher partly because of that promise. And now here was Danny sitting in her third-row desk every day, carrying secrets in a shoebox, and she'd almost missed it. The classroom was quiet now, the sun slanting through the windows in that golden late-afternoon way. Patricia looked around at the empty desks, the alphabet posters on the walls, the reading corner with its bean bags and bookshelves. This room was supposed to be a safe place, a place where kids could learn and grow and just be kids. But for Danny, she realized it was more than that. It was a refuge. It was the eye of whatever storm was happening in his life, and she needed to make sure it stayed that way. Patricia carefully placed all the notes back in the shoebox, arranged exactly how they'd been. She put the photograph back at the bottom, the plastic bag of coins on top of it. She closed the lid gently and put the box back in Danny's desk, pushed toward the back where he kept it. She wouldn't tell him she'd looked inside. That felt like a violation of trust, even though he'd never know. But she couldn't unknow what she'd seen either. Those letters were written to parents who weren't reading them, But maybe, Patricia thought, they were also written to whoever would eventually find them. Maybe Danny had left that box behind on purpose. Maybe part of him wanted someone to see, to know, to care. Well, she'd seen it now, and she wasn't going to look away. Patricia grabbed her bag and locked up her classroom for the weekend. As she walked to her car, she made a decision. On Monday morning, she wouldn't just leave extra sandwiches anymore. She wouldn't just watch from a distance and hope things got better. She was going to do something. She didn't know exactly what yet, but she was going to figure it out. Because 19 years of teaching had taught her one thing above everything else. Sometimes the kids who needed help the most were the ones who never asked for it. They were the quiet ones in the third row, the ones who smiled politely and said they were fine and carried their secrets in old shoeboxes where nobody would think to look. Danny Webb wasn't fine, but maybe with the right kind of help he could be. Patricia didn't sleep much that weekend. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those folded notes, that faded photograph, those coins saved up for reasons she didn't want to imagine. She kept thinking about Danny standing outside her classroom door every morning, waiting to be let in. How many mornings had she smiled and said good morning and never once asked why he was always so early? How many afternoons had she watched him slowly pack his bag, clearly not wanting to leave, and assumed he was just a slow kid? She'd missed so much. Or maybe she'd seen it and just hadn't known what to do about it. By Sunday night, Patricia had made a plan. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something. She was going to start small. Start quiet. She wasn't going to swoop in and try to fix everything at once, because that's how you scared people away. That's how you made things worse. Instead, she was going to do what teachers do best. She was going to show up. Every single day. And she was going to make sure Danny knew he wasn't invisible anymore. Monday morning came cold and gray. Patricia got to school even earlier than usual, stopping by the store on her way to pick up a few things. A pack of granola bars, some juice boxes, a cheap plastic container to keep them in. Nothing fancy. Nothing that would make Danny feel singled out or embarrassed. Just food, available if he wanted it. When she unlocked her classroom door at 7:30, Danny was already there, standing in the hallway with his backpack. He looked startled to see her so early, like maybe he'd been hoping for a few more minutes alone before the day started. "Good morning, Danny," Patricia said, keeping her voice light. Normal. "You're here bright and early." "Good morning, Mrs. Coleman," he said quietly. She opened the door and turned on the lights, and Danny followed her inside like he always did. He went straight to his desk, set his backpack down, and pulled out the shoebox. Patricia's heart clenched as she watched him lift the lid just slightly, peek inside, and then gently close it again. Whatever he was checking for, it was still there. Everything was still okay. Patricia busied herself at her desk, setting out the granola bars and juice boxes in the plastic container. She placed it on the corner of her desk, visible but not obvious. Then she pulled out a piece of notebook paper and started writing. The words came easier than she expected. She kept it simple, honest, not too much but enough. "Danny, I see you. You matter. You're not alone, Mrs. Coleman." She folded the note and walked over to his desk while he was hanging up his backpack. She slipped it inside, right on top of his books where he'd find it first thing. When the other students started arriving, Patricia went through the normal morning routine. Attendance, lunch count, the Pledge of Allegiance. She taught math and then reading, watching Danny out of the corner of her eye. He was even quieter than usual today, which was saying something. But when he opened his desk to get his reading book, she saw him pause. His hand touched the note, unfolded it slowly. He read it, his small face unreadable. Then he looked up at her just for a second, and their eyes met across the classroom. Patricia smiled. Just a small, quick smile. Danny looked down immediately, but she saw the corner of his mouth twitch. Not quite a smile, but something close. It was a start. During lunch, Patricia stayed in her classroom like she always did. She was grading papers when there was a soft knock on the doorframe. Danny stood there, his lunch tray in his hands. The lunch lady had given him the free meal he was eligible for, but he looked uncertain about where to go with it. "Can I eat in here?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Of course," Patricia said, pushing her papers aside. "Come sit down." Danny sat at the desk next to hers, the same desk he sat in every day, and started eating. Patricia pulled out her own lunch and ate too, not saying much. Just being there. After a few minutes, Danny spoke. "Thank you for the note." "You're welcome." "How did you know I needed it?" Patricia considered her answer carefully. She thought about the shoebox, about those letters he'd written to parents who weren't listening. She thought about lying, about pretending it was just a random act of kindness, but something told her Danny deserved the truth. "Because I was a lot like you when I was your age," she said finally. "I know what it's like to feel like you're carrying everything by yourself." Danny looked at her with those serious brown eyes, so much older than 7. "Were you scared all the time?" The question hit Patricia like a punch. "Yeah," she said softly. "Yeah, I was. Me too." They ate in silence for a while. Patricia didn't push. She'd learned that sometimes the most important conversations happened in the quiet spaces between words. Finally, Danny spoke again. "My mom isn't bad. She's just sad a lot. Since my dad left, I know, honey. Sometimes adults go through hard times and it's not anybody's fault. She sleeps a lot during the day, and at night she just sits and watches TV and doesn't really talk. I try to be quiet so I don't make her more sad." Patricia felt her chest tighten. "Danny, you being quiet or loud doesn't make your mom more or less sad. What she's feeling isn't because of you. Do you understand that?" He shrugged, a gesture so small and defeated that Patricia wanted to scoop him up and tell him everything was going to be okay. But she couldn't promise that. She didn't know if it would be. "Can I ask you something?" Patricia said. "Do you eat breakfast at home?" Danny shook his head. "Dinner? Sometimes. If she makes something. Mostly I eat cereal or peanut butter sandwiches." Patricia nodded, keeping her face neutral even though inside she was breaking. "Okay. Well, I want you to know that I keep snacks in here now." She pointed to the container on her desk. "Granola bars, juice, stuff like that. You can have some whenever you want. Before school, after school, anytime, okay?" "Okay. And if you want to eat lunch in here with me every day, that's okay too. Can I?" "Absolutely." Something changed in Danny's face. Not quite relief, but close. Like maybe the weight he'd been carrying got just a tiny bit lighter. Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Danny would arrive early every morning and Patricia would be there waiting. Sometimes they'd talk, sometimes they wouldn't. He'd have a granola bar and juice, which she learned was often the first food he'd eaten since lunch the day before. At lunchtime, he'd eat in her classroom and slowly, gradually, he started to talk more. He told her about his dad who'd left 2 years ago and never called or visited. He told her about his mom, who worked nights at a gas station and slept most of the day. He told her about being alone a lot, about making himself dinner, about the apartment being quiet except for the TV. He told her about writing the letters because it made him feel like maybe someone was listening, even if they weren't. Patricia listened to all of it, and she didn't make promises she couldn't keep. She didn't say everything would be fine or that his mom would get better. She just listened, and every day she showed up. She also started leaving things in his desk. A bookmark with a picture of an astronaut when she learned he loved space. A new notebook when his old one was filled with drawings. A pair of gloves when winter started to hit and she noticed his hands were red from the cold. Small things. Things that said, "I see you. You matter." Danny started leaving notes back. They were simpler than the ones he wrote to his parents. "Thank you for the granola bar. I liked the bookmark. You're nice." But they meant something. They meant he was starting to trust that someone was actually paying attention. Patricia also did something she'd been putting off. She called the school counselor, a kind woman named Ruth who'd been at Oakwood for years. They met after school one day and Patricia told her everything. The shoebox, the letters, the situation at home. Ruth listened, took notes, and didn't judge. "I've been trying to reach the mom for months," Ruth said. "I've left messages, sent letters home, even stopped by the apartment once. No answer. What can we do?" Patricia asked. "Keep doing what you're doing," Ruth said. "Keep showing up for him. Keep feeding him. Keep making your classroom a safe place. And I'll see if I can connect with some community resources, food banks, counseling services, things that might help without being too invasive." "Is that enough?" "I don't know," Ruth said honestly. "But it's better than nothing." So Patricia kept showing up. Every morning, every lunch, every afternoon when Danny would linger after the bell rang. She couldn't fix his home or make his mom suddenly better. She couldn't bring his dad back or make sure he had 3 meals a day outside of school. But she could be constant. She could be reliable. She could be the one adult in his life who showed up every single time. And slowly something started to shift in Danny. He raised his hand in class once, then twice, then regularly. He started talking to the other kids at recess, joining their games instead of sitting alone under the tree. He laughed, which was a sound Patricia hadn't heard from him in months. He was still quiet, still cautious, still carrying more than a kid should have to carry, but he wasn't invisible anymore. Because Patricia Coleman had opened a shoebox full of secrets and decided that she couldn't pretend she hadn't seen what was inside. She'd decided that one child's struggle mattered. Even if she couldn't fix everything, she'd decided to show up, and sometimes that's exactly what makes the difference. 3 months had passed since Patricia found the shoebox. It was late February now, the kind of cold gray winter that made you forget what sunshine felt like. But inside room 14 at Oakwood Elementary, something had quietly shifted. Danny still arrived early every morning, but now he came with a backpack that had food in it. Not much, but something. An apple, maybe. A pack of crackers. Patricia had connected Ruth, the school counselor, with a local food bank, and they'd started doing deliveries to Danny's apartment building. Anonymous deliveries so his mom wouldn't feel ashamed or singled out. Just boxes of groceries left at the door with a note saying they were from a community program. Danny still ate lunch with Patricia, but now he talked more. About school, about the book he was reading, about a documentary on space he'd watched. He smiled more too, real smiles that reached his eyes. Patricia had learned to read the hard days. There were still plenty of them. Days when Danny would come in extra quiet, his face tight and his eyes red like maybe he'd been crying. Days when he'd barely touch his food and wouldn't meet her eyes. On those days, she didn't push. She just sat with him, let him know he wasn't alone, and waited for whatever storm was happening at home to pass. The shoebox was still in his desk. He still looked inside it every day. Patricia wondered sometimes if he still wrote letters to parents who didn't read them, or if maybe he'd found another way to process what he was feeling. She never asked. Some things were private, even for a teacher who cared as much as she did. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late February when everything changed again. Patricia was teaching a math lesson, talking about addition and subtraction when there was a knock on her classroom door. The school secretary, Mrs. Patterson, poked her head in with an apologetic look. "Sorry to interrupt, Patricia. Danny has a visitor in the office. His mother is here." Patricia's heart jumped. In all these months, Jennifer Webb had never once come to the school. Not for parent-teacher conferences, not for the winter program, not even to drop Danny off or pick him up. He rode the bus both ways, or on bad days, he walked the 6 blocks from the apartment. Danny's face went very still. Patricia saw the flash of fear in his eyes, quickly hidden. "Go ahead, Danny," she said gently. "Take your time." He stood up slowly, like maybe if he moved carefully enough, this wouldn't be happening. Patricia watched him leave, then tried to refocus on the math lesson even though her mind was racing. Why was Jennifer here? What had happened? Was this good news or bad news? 20 minutes later, Danny still hadn't come back. Patricia assigned the class some independent work and slipped out into the hallway. She could hear voices coming from the main office, a woman's voice thin and tired, Mrs. Patterson's calmer tones, and Ruth, the counselor, speaking in that careful way she had. Patricia walked toward the office and stopped just outside, not wanting to intrude but needing to know what was happening. Through the open door, she could see Danny sitting on the bench by the secretary's desk, his hands folded in his lap, staring at the floor. Next to him was a woman who had to be his mother. Jennifer Webb looked younger than Patricia had expected, maybe early 30s, with the same dark hair as the woman in the photograph. But where that woman had been smiling and healthy-looking, this woman was thin, pale with shadows under her eyes that spoke of exhaustion that went bone deep. She wore a gas station uniform, the kind with a name tag and a company logo. Her hands were shaking. "I'm trying," Jennifer was saying, her voice cracking. I know I've been terrible. But I'm trying now. I found your letters, the ones from the counselor, the ones from the food bank people, and I realized I don't even know what's happening with my own kid. I don't know what grade he's really doing in. I don't know if he has friends. I don't know anything. It's okay, Ruth was saying. You're here now. That's what matters. I'm not okay. I haven't been okay since Tim left. Since he just walked out one day and never came back. I felt like I drowned and Danny kept trying to save me and I couldn't even see him. I couldn't see anything. Patricia felt tears prick her eyes. She looked at Danny, still staring at the floor, his small shoulders tense. I started going to counseling, Jennifer continued. 3 weeks ago. I almost didn't go, but I kept thinking about all those groceries showing up and how I don't even deserve help. And the counselor said I was depressed. Like really depressed. She said I needed help and medicine and I needed to start taking care of myself so I could take care of Danny. That takes a lot of courage, Ruth said. Coming to that realization and asking for help. I'm not brave. I'm a mess, but Danny shouldn't have to pay for that. Jennifer turned to look at her son, really look at him, maybe for the first time in months. I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry I haven't been there. Danny finally looked up. His eyes were wet. It's okay, Mom. It's not okay. But I want to try to make it better. The counselor got me on some medicine and I have a day shift now at work instead of nights. And I want to start over. I want to actually be your mom again. Patricia stepped into the office then. She couldn't help it. Jennifer looked up, saw her, and something crossed her face that might have been shame or fear or both. You must be Mrs. Coleman, Jennifer said quietly. Mrs. Patterson told me you've been the one feeding my son because I wasn't. I've been helping however I can, Patricia said carefully. Danny is a wonderful kid. He is. Jennifer's voice broke. And I've been so lost in my own head that I almost lost him too. There was a long moment of silence. Then Jennifer stood up, walked over to Danny, and knelt down in front of him. She took his hands in hers. I can't promise I'll be perfect, she said. I'm probably going to have bad days still. But I'm going to try. I'm going to really try. And I'm going to start by saying, I love you, and I see you, and I'm sorry I made you feel invisible. Danny threw his arms around his mother's neck and started crying. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears that had probably been building up for months or maybe years. Jennifer held him crying too, and Patricia had to look away because it felt too private, too raw, but she also felt something else. Hope. Fragile, uncertain hope that maybe this family could start to heal. Over the next few weeks, things slowly started to change. Jennifer came to the parent-teacher conference looking nervous but present. She asked questions about Danny's schoolwork, about what he liked to read, about whether he needed anything. Patricia told her about the shoebox, about the letters, and Jennifer cried but didn't fall apart. She thanked Patricia for caring about her son when she couldn't. Danny started getting picked up from school sometimes instead of taking the bus. Jennifer would arrive in her gas station uniform, tired but smiling, and Danny would light up in a way Patricia had never seen before. They'd walk to the car together, talking, and Patricia would watch from her classroom window and feel her heart get full. The shoebox stayed in Danny's desk, but he didn't look in it as often anymore. One day, Patricia noticed it was gone entirely. She wondered if he'd thrown it away or if he'd taken it home. She hoped it was the second one. Those letters deserved to be read, even if it was years later. Even if it was painful. They deserved to be witnessed. Jennifer wasn't perfect. There were still hard days when she'd miss a pickup or forget to pack Danny's lunch. But she was trying, genuinely trying, and that made all the difference. She kept going to counseling. She took her medication. She started cooking dinner more nights than not. And slowly, Danny started looking like what he'd always deserved to be, a regular kid. He joined the after-school art club. He made a friend, a boy named Chris who loved space as much as he did. He brought home drawings and paintings and was proud of them. He laughed during class and raised his hand and wasn't afraid to take up space anymore. One afternoon in late April, as Danny was packing up to go home, he stopped by Patricia's desk. Mrs. Coleman? Yeah, honey? Thank you. For everything. For the food and the notes and for seeing me when nobody else did. Patricia felt her throat go tight. You're welcome, Danny, but you know what? You were always worth seeing. Even when you felt invisible, you weren't. You mattered then and you matter now. Danny nodded, his eyes bright. My mom said you saved us. Your mom saved you. She did the hard work of getting help and showing up. I just made sure you weren't alone while she figured it out. That's still saving, Danny said simply. He gave her a quick hug and ran out to where his mother was waiting. Patricia watched them leave, her heart full of something that felt like purpose. This is why she taught, not for the lesson plans or the test scores or the parent emails. For this, for kids like Danny who needed someone to see them, to show up for them, to believe they were worth the effort. The next day, Patricia found something on her desk, a drawing in Danny's careful hand. It showed two figures, one small and one tall, standing under a sun. At the bottom, he'd written, Thank you for being my sunshine on cloudy days. Patricia pinned it to her bulletin board, right next to her desk, where she'd see it every day. And every time she looked at it, she remembered why small acts of kindness weren't small at all. They were everything. The years passed the way they always do in elementary schools. New students arrived every September. Old students moved on to middle school every June, and the rhythm of teaching continued. Patricia Coleman watched hundreds of kids walk through her classroom door, each one carrying their own stories, their own struggles, their own secret shoeboxes that maybe nobody else could see. But she never forgot Danny Webb. How could she? He taught her something that no college course or professional development workshop ever had. He taught her that the quietest kids were often carrying the loudest pain, that sometimes the greatest act of teaching wasn't about math or reading or science. It was about showing up, about seeing a child who felt invisible and saying, through actions more than words, you matter. Danny moved on to 3rd grade, then 4th, then 5th. Patricia would see him in the hallways sometimes, always walking with his friend Chris, both of them chattering about planets or rockets or whatever space thing had captured their imagination that week. He'd wave at her, smile that real smile that reached his eyes, and keep walking. He looked like what he'd always deserved to be. A regular kid having a regular childhood. Jennifer kept trying too. Patricia heard updates through the school grapevine. She'd gotten a better job at a medical supply company. She'd kept going to counseling. She and Danny had moved to a better apartment across town, closer to Jennifer's sister who'd come back into their lives. It wasn't perfect, it was never going to be perfect, but it was better. So much better than that winter when a 7-year-old was writing letters to parents who couldn't hear him. Sometimes Patricia wondered about those letters, if Jennifer had ever found them, if she'd read them and understood the weight her son had been carrying, if they talked about it, or if it was one of those things families quietly moved past, too painful to examine in the light. Patricia hoped they'd talked about it. She hoped Jennifer knew how close she'd come to losing her son, not physically but emotionally, how close Danny had come to believing he wasn't worth noticing, wasn't worth caring about, wasn't worth the space he took up in the world. But more than that, Patricia hoped Danny knew he'd always been worth it. From the very first day he walked into her classroom with duct-taped shoes and a guarded heart, he'd always been worth it. 10 years went by, then 12, then 15. Patricia was 62 years old now, thinking about retirement but not quite ready to let go. She'd seen a lot over her career, kids who came from broken homes and kids who came from perfect ones, kids who struggled and kids who excelled, kids who needed everything and kids who needed nothing. She'd done her best by all of them, but she knew there were some you just couldn't reach, some situations you couldn't fix no matter how hard you tried. That was the hard part about teaching. You poured your heart into these kids for a year, sometimes changing their whole trajectory, and then they moved on and you rarely knew how the story ended. You just had to trust that the seeds you planted would grow, even if you never got to see the garden. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October when Patricia found an envelope in her school mailbox. Not the internal mail system, but an actual envelope with a stamp, addressed to Mrs. Patricia Coleman at Oakwood Elementary. The return address was from a university in another state. Patricia sat down in the teacher's lounge and opened it carefully. Inside was a letter, typed but with a handwritten note at the bottom. She started reading. Dear Mrs. Coleman,